Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. A new humble indie bundle is indeed out right now for you to purchase, and I like to cover these whenever they creep up on us, and they do creep up out of nowhere. There is no warning. Well, I get a little bit of warning because they kind of tell me, but there is mostly no warning. And then suddenly, we are given the option to buy a whole bunch of games for whatever price we so desire. And lately, it's been a little interesting because they have diverged from their original model. The Humble THQ bundle was the latest to grace our palette, and that was a rather interesting one because those were not indie games at all, and they did not provide a Linux version, a Mac version, and the usual extras, but what they did provide, of course, was a bevy of really great games, which in the eyes of many seems to be worth about $5 for whatever reason, although bear in mind the average was, of course, pulled down by the many people that decided getting it for 1 cent was a really clever idea, which it is, of course, not. The latest Humble Indie Bundle has now reached our shores, and it is very much a Humble Indie Bundle. When I've tried to cover these in the past, it's been a little bit tricky because I can't really figure out the best format. Do I plug everything together? Do I essentially take my old WTF IS for the games that were in there and then add new ones in there and kind of stick them all together as a big video? Do I just do a video of one of the games and tell you about the others while I'm playing it? It is a little tricky to sort the format out, honestly. However, this time around, they've graced us with a bundle that actually has games that I have done videos of. All of them. Every last one of them. Unless you count Indie Game the Movie, which is not a game. So that's really not all that relevant to our discussion. So what that means is, I'm going to do a quick roundup. This will be your nice and easy buyer's guide to the latest Humble Indie Bundle, and this will of course be using previous footage from my old WTF IS videos, but I'm going to summarize my opinion in about 2 minutes for each game, which should make things a hell of a lot easier. You will also be provided links down the bottom if you wish to go and watch the full video, if you wish to know more about that particular title. So, let us start off, shall we? The first game in the bundle is Legend of Grimrock. What is Legend of Grimrock all about? Well, it is a dungeon crawler in the classic style, that being the first-person style with a party of 4. What you do is you essentially explore the dungeon, you fight monsters in first person, and of course in real time, and your entire party is controlled by you. You don't see your party at any point. What you do is you rearrange your party. You've got 2 at the front, 2 at the back, and you have to control all 4 at once. This game has a great deal of puzzle solving involved in it, which may be a little bit of a kick in the teeth for you. It certainly was for me. I appreciated the game, and I thought it was really good when I played through it, and I would still hold that opinion. However, for me personally, I don't really like the puzzle solving elements. I would have preferred a bigger focus on the RPG aspects as opposed to having to crawl around the dungeon solving puzzles, and of course keeping out for little switches in the texture of the walls. However, that does not make the game bad, it just means that I personally didn't like that particular element of it from a purely subjective standpoint. The game itself is actually great. It's an incredible looking game, it's got excellent atmosphere, really good lighting effects, and since my previous video they have released a level editor for it, which means there is a ton more content available for this. It's also rock hard, by the way. So if you're looking for something a little bit challenging, then this very well might be for you. Unless, of course, you have a fear of giant spiders, of which there are many. Dungeon Defenders. Well, it's fairly self-explanatory from the name. You have to defend the dungeon, and indeed the crystal in the center of the dungeon, from increasingly difficult hordes. It is one of those third-person tower defense games. Came around the same time as Orcs Must Die, but this has a very large focus on co-op play. You can play it single player, but it's certainly nowhere near as fun. You pick a hero, you level that hero up, you gain various abilities, you can even buy different pets and things like that, which will assist you in battle, and you construct various different barricades and towers depending on your class in order to defend against the marauding hordes. It's got a nice colorful graphic style to it, a relatively fun combat system. It's a little bit simplistic in places, but it is very difficult indeed, so that is worth a try if you're looking for a challenge from the kind of tower defense-ish, the more active style of tower defense. What I will say is that Dungeon Defenders is chock full of DLC, which very well might be something that puts you off if you're looking for the complete experience. Some DLC was released for free, however, there is a great deal more that was not. In fact, there are no less than 24 pieces of content for this particular game, and only 2 of them are actually free. The rest of them range anywhere from 99 cents to $5. So you can definitely see what the business model was there. They sold different heroes, they sold different mission packs, and so on and so forth. None are really required to enjoy the game, and I feel that as a 4-player co-op experience, it is absolutely wonderful, and you can totally enjoy it with the default pack, although I would suggest that you play it with friends that also haven't played the game before, because if you're going to play with a bunch of guys that are really leveled up and things like that, it just isn't quite as fun. So start afresh with a bunch of new players if you picked it up from the Humble Indie Bundle, and it's a very enjoyable third-person tower defense experience. The Binding of Isaac. An interesting one, to say the least. Something of a roguelike game with the art provided by a fellow from Team Meat. So you may see some comparisons between the art style in this game and, of course, the previous game by the name of Super Meat Boy. And this is a game that I didn't necessarily get into all that much. I do have a bit of an affinity for roguelike games. I used to play old-school stuff like Angband and all of its previous variants, as well as, of course, Umoria. But this game didn't really grab me. I only played it during the WTF-a-thon live stream. I wasn't really too much of a fan of the twisted nature of it. It's kind of got a lot of gross-out humor in it, which didn't really click with me, but of course, that is a personal preference. This game does seem to have an awful lot of followers and is somewhat popular, to say the least, but I didn't necessarily see the appeal. It's got a pretty simplistic combat system, it is rather challenging, and as I said, it's got this very odd sense of humor to it. In my opinion, Binding of Isaac is probably the weakest part of this bundle, but that's just through personal preference. There are so many other people that really enjoy Binding of Isaac for whatever reason. It's pretty damn challenging, and the whole thing is randomly generated, so it does have a ton of replayability, but once you die, that is it, you have to start the game again, so be prepared for a fairly masochistic experience. The next game is Snapshot, one of the newer titles to be added to this bundle. I actually found this game really charming. So the idea is you're controlling a robot, and the aim is, of course, to get to the end of the level, and you do so by taking snapshots of parts of the level, which you can then composite into the scene in different ways. And I actually found it pretty clever. It involves rotating elements of the level in order to bypass it, as well as bringing various items from around the level in order to climb up on them, or just use them to activate switches and things like that. It does have a good soundtrack, a nice clean graphic style, and a rather cutesy protagonist, and it does have a hell of a lot of content as well. If you're not into puzzle platformers, then of course you're going to hate its guts, but it is more of the traditional puzzle experience as opposed to a very gimmicky one. It's a case of get the right items and use them to complete the level, and that is pretty much that. It's not my kind of game, but I certainly appreciate it for what it is, and if you are into puzzlers, then Snapshot is definitely not a bad choice. Speaking of puzzle games, the next game on the list is Closure. Now, this is a puzzle platformer with a little bit more of the modern flavor to it. Now, by modern, I mean everything that came after Braid, for the most part. It takes one core mechanic and builds the entire game around it, and in this case, the idea is if you can't see it, it doesn't exist. So it is a monochrome game about manipulating light in the level to allow you to bypass the bottomless pit that is everywhere where the light is not shining. It's got a rather creepy character and soundtrack, to say the least, but it is a very clever game indeed, and extremely well executed. It is a little bit brain-bending to start with. You do have to keep remembering that simple axiom: if I cannot see it, it does not exist, but you will find enjoyment here if you are into puzzle platformers. Now, Indie Game the Movie is not something that I've actually got around to watching. I have heard certain things about it. For instance, there are some rather dodgy quotes from developers like Phil Fish, who said he would literally kill himself if his game was not released, and also a bunch of kind of pretentious stuff about mainstream games being utter garbage. It's unfortunate because it seems that some parts of this video do actually reinforce the stereotype that indie games are overly pretentious and that indie developers genuinely believe they're making the best thing ever, and that all of this mainstream stuff is absolute trash consumed only by idiots. So that's not so good, is it? But at the end of the day, it's also part of the Humble Indie Bundle, so you really have no excuse not to at least dip into it and see as to whether or not it is to your taste. And finally, what I would argue is probably the standout game of this bundle, it is Shank 2. I love the Shank games to death because I'm a big fan of beat-em-ups and brawlers, and Shank does so in a very hyper-stylized way. And the art style that Clay put into play in pretty much all of their games, in fact, including recently the beta for Don't Starve as well as Mark of the Ninja, is always very unique. Shank 2 is pretty much an improvement in every way on the original game as far as I'm concerned, although I would recommend playing it with a joypad as opposed to actually playing it with mouse and keyboard. It's not that mouse and keyboard is impossible, far from it, you can definitely do it, but the controls are a little stiffer with the keyboard. Certainly not unplayable, though, by any stretch of the imagination, and it is a truly wonderful ultra-violent simulator. If you're looking for a little bit of the old ultra-violence, then Shank 2 is the best place to acquire it. If you like stabbing people repeatedly, if you like attacking them with chainsaws and comboing together in a rather wonderfully presented world, then Shank 2 is a good option for you, and as far as I'm concerned, as a result, the standout of the bundle. So there you go, folks. If you wanted to check out any of these games, then by all means do so. By clicking the links on the screen, you'll be able to check out all of the games, and of course, do remember, folks, that the Humble Bundle is run at cost for the Humble Bundle guys. This is not a free thing they are doing. They are hosting a great deal of files, a lot of bandwidth is being used, and of course, payment transaction fees across the board for a wide variety of services. That means that if you donate a cent and get this thing for cheap, then you are utterly and totally screwing over everybody, which includes the charities that the developers have nominated, the developers themselves, and the guys behind the Humble Bundle, which makes you a douchebag. So I would not suggest doing that. Some people keep asking me, well, what would you recommend? What is the sale price that you would necessarily pick for this? Well, honestly, what I would do is take all of the games, consider them all, say, being on sale for 75% off, then slash that price by 3/4, and then you'll get a reasonable number. And also, of course, consider what you want from the bundle. If you're only going to be playing 1 or 2 games, then I don't think it's unreasonable to kind of subtract the games that you didn't want to play from the actual price, even though it seems kind of weird to do so. That's a reasonable way, of course, of determining how much you should be paying for it. Looking at this bundle right now, I'd be paying around, I would say, $15. Grimrock Dungeon Defenders and Shank 2 make it worthwhile. And honestly, if I were to buy this bundle and not played any of these games, then chances are those would be the 3 games that I'd actually put a reasonable amount of time into. If I was a fan of puzzle platformers, of course, then you can add Snapshot and Closure to the list as being really, really good indeed. And a couple of bucks to Indie Game the Movie is hardly unreasonable, just out of curiosity's sake. But again, just pay what you think is reasonable. Pay what you think you can afford, and don't tell me it's $1. You can afford more than that. Price of a Subway sandwich is $5. You eat that in about 10 minutes. You're going to have a lot more fun with this indie game collection. So do think about that, and the more that you spend on this, then the more great bundles you're going to get. So it is beneficial to you. And do remember to set your own distribution for the amount of money. Some people just want to give it all to charity. Some people want to give it to the developers only, and some, of course, want to distribute it evenly, and, of course, give a tip to the humble guys to make sure they can actually stay in business and continue to do this. Do remember, of course, you should never feel pressured into doing charity at all, especially bearing in mind the charities that they put up there may not be to your liking. Charity is a very personal thing, and no one should criticize you for your choice of charity or indeed not choosing to be charitable at all. Alright, folks, there you go. That is my roundup of the latest Humble Indie Bundle, and that is available over at humblebundle.com. Do remember that if you pay more than the average, generally speaking, they unlock games further down into the bundle's timeline. So in a few days, we may very well see the addition of more titles. Those are things that I do not know about, so I cannot reveal that information to you, but you should go check out the Humble Bundle over at humblebundle.com. I'll see you next time.